Okay, good. Well, thank you for all attendance and to share today this webinar. I will welcome any questions and Q&A session we will have afterwards. Let's start with a short presentation. The general idea is attended the previous webinars. You've seen that it would be great to have many consumers paid and bring their flexibility to the system. But there are some obstacles, and one of them is there any benefit? Is there any interest for them to do so? And we will describe today how it becomes easy and nice for all consumers that are happy to participate, including households. And of course, it's a kind of new approach, we call it X-IoE or Internet of Energy. When I speak, of course, in the context of that we are all well aware of, which has immense energy challenges for the years to come, with climate change, growth of intermittency from renewables, new loads in the system, and so on. In this context, what we do is manage demand is real as accurately as generation was managed traditionally, in order to have it contribute as an alternative to generation. Of course, the way to do it by aggregating many distributed or widespread loads, even generation assets, that we kind of aggregate, monitor, control in thousands or 100,000s, and we have already equipped 100,000 homes, which means 1 million appliances that are under control for several years. These are two or three lines about what is we. We is Voltalis. We are a flexibility aggregator for, as we say, all, including small consumers, so including residential, also commercial, basically opposed to industrial tech, which we don't operate. We operate flexible loads, and we'll go into more detail about that. So maybe numbers I should put, the fact that we have over 100,000 homes, the fact that we are now rolling another 100,000 with support from the European Investment Bank to do so in the context of the Climate Action Plan. And of course, we started in France, where we have most of our experience for years now, but we are also developing in several European and non-European countries. Let's first, because we are here in the users TCP webinar, let's first look at what it means to participate as a consumer. What do consumers see? So what they have is typically various appliances, various uses of electricity. They might have in their home or office or shop, whatever. And some of them are flexible. When we say flexible loads, of course, this can be, for instance, electricity heaters or air conditioning or boilers and those kinds of things, because stopping those for 5 or 10 minutes is not a problem. It's not even felt by consumers. This is opposed to, for instance, your ADSL box or your television or your light or your electric cooking or whatever that you need when you need it. Well, indeed, this in the case of, for instance, heating or cooling, because there is thermal inertia in the building, for instance, then it's not a problem to stop the use of electricity during 5 minutes for those appliances. I'm not about curtailing the whole home, and that is part of the answer to the first question that was written in the Q&A screen. We are only targeting very specific appliances that are flexible. And in order to operate those appliances and not the whole electricity supply of a whole consumer, well, of course, we need to install some hardware. And this is a typical hardware solution we provide, which is using both a kind of gateway, so a kind of telecom box that we can talk to remotely over the internet, and this box will in turn talk to an electric box. Let's call it like this, smart switch if you want, and this will be able to measure the consumption of the said appliances and to change it, to curtail it. Of course, this box is also able to discuss directly with smart devices, like some, for instance, rooftop coolers, and then there's no need for a smart switch, provided there is a switch in the appliance itself. So if the appliance is smart, then you can directly connect it to this gateway. If the appliance is dumb, then you need to make it smart, and then you can use, for instance, our smart switch. So as I mentioned, the hardware that is installed, this is something we provide to consumers for free of charge for the consumer. They don't pay anything. We'll explain this miracle afterwards, but of course it's a key aspect of our approach, which is those consumers who participate, they don't pay anything because they are providing the flexibility, and all the consumers will benefit from that flexibility. So they should not pay for that. They should maybe be rewarded, but not pay. So we make it free for them to participate and get our hardware and software installed and used for them. Another way we reward them is by providing some smart services, typical smart energy services you must have heard about, like, of course, monitoring the consumption over time, comparing with last week, with your neighbor and everything, turning kilowatt hours into euros in case of France, and well, money, and also using several added value services, which makes it possible to alert you if your consumption is above a certain threshold, or those kinds of things. So there are this is all free for the consumer, and it's important to notice that being free, it helps them to save energy by using this information, by using their services. These services, well, they tend to reduce their electricity consumption overall, and therefore to reduce their electricity bill. So that's overall how consumers feel regarding our participation to our service. It's not our own arguments to warn them. It's what they consider as the good reasons for them to participate. And we ask them, what are reasons you participate, you accepted to participate in that flexibility service, and this is what they told us. First, of course, they didn't tell us, but I must mention, of course, it's free, and that's important, probably for all of them. Now, knowing it's free, what they like it's smart, so you have a friendly interface, it provides you savings, it is not affecting your comfort, and I'll explain that in more details later, but you understand that stopping the heating for 5 minutes has no impact on the comfort. And they appreciate that it's eco-friendly. So they appreciate that by providing flexibility to the electricity system, they will contribute to avoid significant CO2 emissions and to save energy overall. And that is something they like, because they've heard now so much about the climate change, how to fight, what to do about it. And now they find something very simple and practical they can do about it. Is just accept to participate and accept our device so that we can monitor their electricity consumption, and of course help them optimize this consumption to reduce it, particularly to reduce it when it helps the overall system. I see there's a question in the chat, but that's not easy to answer. So if you can have the questions in the Q&A part, that would be easier to deal with later on. Now I mentioned, of course, what the consumers see, typically residential consumers, but I also mentioned that we have commercial consumers, and of course we have more advanced interfaces for those commercial consumers. For instance, if a company has 25 shops, they don't want to go to 25 different login accounts to see the details of the consumption. They want to compare, and this is the kind of interface we provide them to do so. Now, I mentioned, of course, the solution seen from the consumers, and we'll go now to what it looks like at grid level. However, there's one thing I forgot to mention, which is important and can be illustrated by that photo, which is we take control over the appliances of the consumer, but they can take control back anytime. So they can, for instance, press this button here. If their appliances are dumb and they have this smart switch, they can press this button here, and we will not operate their loads during a given number of hours after that. Of course, they never really press this button because we never change their comfort at all. They have no reason to do so, but it's a legal kind of commercial and legal provision that we ensure them, which is we can operate your loads, but you can refuse anytime. You can take back control anytime. And anyway, it's totally transparent because you see all the details of your load curve, and there you will see also the times when we curtail for 10 minutes. So that's totally transparent. That was seen from the consumer side. Let's go now to the grid level. And why we do that, of course, it's because by aggregating those small curtailments, we can provide interesting services at grid level. So on the left part of the screen, you see two individual load curves, which are really typical. That is, the first one is a load curve typical of electric heating in France. So you have several colors because you have several heaters and a water boiler here in red, and you see the load over time, and you see those white stripes when we stop the heating during 5, 10, 15 minutes. Down there in orange, you see the example of an air conditioner in Asia, by the way. And again, you see those white stripes when we curtail for 5 minutes. By the way, we don't curtail the fan, but only the compressor. So that's most of the power, electric power, and it is not felt by consumers. That's important, as opposed to the fan. And as you know, the fan indicates that the air conditioning is on. So when you stop the fan, you stop the noise and people feel warm. So we don't do that. We only operate the compressors. That's most efficient. Now, by aggregating those small curtailments during several minutes and doing that in turn, so having thousands of them during 5 minutes and then another 1,000 in the next 5 minutes and so on, we can deliver various services like megawatts during 1 hour or 2 hours, or less megawatts during more time, or peak shaving at local, on your local area where there would be a local distribution grid constraint or such thing, and even frequency control. So that's really real time within seconds. So these are different time frames where we can react. And of course, we are very quick. And based telecom is a very quick system, quicker than fossil fuel power plants, of course. So that's the overall idea, to aggregate flexibility and be able to change. By the way, I always talk about curtailing, but it's so increasing. So we're able to, for instance, on when there's not renewable energy available. So that's the other way around, the flexibility upwards rather than downwards. To provide that, so you must guess that we have hardware, as I described, that is installed at consumer premises, but we also need a lot of software to coordinate all those appliances and algorithms to calculate how to deliver a given pattern of load shedding to the grid, as according to the commitments needs of the grid. As an example, we usually talk about to TSO, but it's also interesting, so at transport level, but it's also interesting that spread demand response from homes can contribute balance because it's very local, it's widespread among large amounts of appliances and consumers, basically all over. And particularly in those areas where there are local constraints in the grid, then we can, in real time, decide, okay, we want to curtail this amount. How much do we have? We have 3.23 megawatts. So if we send an immediate order we can shut down or delay that or split whatever, and that will provide balancing services to the distribution grid operator. Another example for distribution grid is the way we can operate load shifting for water boilers. So this is interesting because we've heard so much about demand response, something that can be triggered by varying prices, so dynamic prices, like having peak prices during daytime and night prices that would be lower. The problem with that, and we've had that in France for decades, the problem is that when you are back into night period, all the water boilers see its low price and they get on together. And that might bring constraints locally in the distribution grid. It's much better to spread the load during 2, 3, 4 hours during the night, so that in the end, of course, everyone will have warm waters for their shower in the morning, but the peak locally would be reduced, so you avoid investing in the local grid, which is very costly. Now, just to summarize what I said, this is a kind of graph explaining we use a smart box, we aggregate monitoring and controlling of the load, we use algorithms for that, and so on. And we can then, towards consumer, provide smart energy management. And regarding the grid, we basically substitute to generation and to grid investments, which is a lot of money that can be saved and also a lot of CO2 emissions. By the way, if you have flexible demand, you can have more renewable in the grid, so that connected to the grid, so that you can increase the share of renewables overall without huge costs. So this is not just a technical story, as you may know, coming from various parts of the world. There is a worldwide potential for the use of such solutions. And these are two or three illustrations. One is what we are currently doing in Europe, so in France and other countries in Europe. And you see here, in every time we partner with very different companies or associations, including cities and all those people who want to do something, and they're very happy to welcome our solution, which is free to all and provides benefit for all consumers and for the planet. That's what we do in Europe okay, let me take just one example. And this partner is a supplier, and there are several of those not mentioned in the slide. Several partnerships we have with suppliers who want to provide more services to the consumers and also to derive more value from having a consumer. So the idea is globally, if you supply electricity to a consumer, you can have some margin on this business, but if you also collect flexibility from the consumer, then you will have additional revenues from that consumer because you sell that flexibility in the market at wholesale level. So that's the example of Europe. Then we can look at what it means in several countries. So depending on where you come from, you will look in whatever part of this map, which has only several examples. An important thing here to mention is that depending on the regions, you would rather use electrical heating, or rather electricity for cooling, like air conditioning. And of course, in both cases, it's significant consumption that is also flexible and that you find it widespread. So many sources of flexibility available across the country. One example here in more detail is the greater Tokyo area, where you see where the consumption over 24 hours in a typical spring day. And you see that the share from households and businesses is very important, even compared to industry. And of course, most of it is flexible because most of the consumption, or an important part of the consumption, is for heating or cooling. And therefore, there is a huge potential of flexibility provided we can collect it as explained. Another example here is in California with the new issue, which is during daytime, you have more and more sun. Photovoltaic electricity. So the residual part you need to generate is lower and lower. And then you're wondering how will you cover the night period? And then if you can make consumption flexible, consume more during daytime, less during the evening, and so on, it will really help the system and the overall cost to use the renewable energy. That, by the way, this is funny. This was a curve provided by CAISO, so the operator in California, some years ago for this year. And what is happening is typically worse than expected. I mean, the issue is greater, and so the solution is even more needed. So that was the slide showing that there is a need of internationally. Now, okay, how can we meet this need? So I described the technical solution. Now we must look at the business case. How does all that work? And of course, you've understood already that most of the revenues will not come from consumers who participate. We would rather reward them with services. No, the revenues will come from wholesale level, from wholesale markets, from provided services to the grid operators. So how is that designed? There's something strange about demand response. It is that when you curtail demand from one consumer, he is fine because you're just helping him to reduce for a very small moment, very small period, his consumption. That will save a lot on his bill. But then this means that the supplier of electricity will charge him less, and the supplier may not be that happy depending on when that happened and so on. But overall, the suppliers overall, and then for the consumer overall, will be happy that this consumer has provided flexibility because it will avoid high prices when prices are high. And this was explained first by the American regulator, FERC, who said, okay, there's something interesting, is that when prices are high, so when you're in the right part of this curve, when prices are high, if you reduce demand a lot, of course, there will be less revenue for suppliers because you reduce consumption. But overall, the market price, the wholesale market price will be cheaper because you avoid using the peak power plant that is so expensive and that would grow to a high level. So if you can avoid demand at those periods, then you benefit all retailers who buy in the market cheaper, and therefore you benefit all consumers. So maybe one consumer was charged less because he provided he was charged less by his suppliers, so he's very happy, but that's not so happy. Also, all suppliers overall are very happy because they save electricity. So you have to kind of share those net benefit. There is a benefit, and there is also a so-called cost for retail who charges less to consumers. Now, the comparison between the benefit in green and the cost in red here is interesting if you look at the numbers. And this is in a country like France. Suppose the total need for electricity would be 60,000 megawatt hour during that hour, so typically 60 gigawatts at that moment. And the market price would be 70. So that's not very high, but already somehow higher than the average spot price. And if you offer some DR in the market, you will avoid the most expensive generation, and therefore you will need less generation. So if you offer 100, then you need only the rest from generators. And this will, of course, avoid highest price. So let's say you reduce the market price to 68. So, of course, the profit for retailers will be paying 68 instead of 70 for the overall 60,000 they buy. Notice that they buy generation, but they also buy demand response, which is offered in the market. And so it's overall a cost. And of course, the issue is that they buy 60,000 while consumers will consume only the reduced amount of 59.9 thousand. And therefore, they will have a cost of not selling 100 megawatt hours, which is, of course, some volume they buy and they don't sell. So it's a pure cost to buy this volume of 100 at the market price of 68, which is a cost of 6.8. Now, if you compare the benefit of 120 to the cost of 6.8, you obtain a benefit cost ratio of 18, which is a good reason to have flexibility in the market. Now, you may wonder, these are just numbers to illustrate, to explain works. What are the real numbers? To refer to the European study by the Regulatory Assistance Project. They made this study of saying, okay, suppose demand response steps in the market when prices are high and takes it down, let's say for 400 hours per year, 1 gigawatt, and they studied 3 different regions in Europe. And they looked at what is the overall market benefit, and you see hundreds of millions of euros compared to a cost of tens of millions of euros per year. So this is how you end up with a benefit cost ratio from 10 to 70. So it's not 10%, it's 10 times. The benefit is 10 times the cost. Some flexibility to avoid high prices is 10 times the cost for the cost of providing demand response. So this is a very nice, not so much a nice business model for demand response. It's a nice thing for customers who ultimately buy this demand response volume through the suppliers in the market. It's kind of cost, but the benefit is 10 times the cost. So it's good to buy some flexibility, a little amount of flexibility to reduce hugely the overall cost of sourcing electricity. So this is the European study. You will find various numbers and slightly different approaches on that in different countries. I already mentioned the USA and FERC, who provided this analysis of comparing benefits to cost and therefore deciding on the basis of the overall net benefit of having demand response in the market. Now, the conclusion and the rule they adopted in the US, some of you may know, is that demand response is invited to participate in the electricity wholesale markets as soon as the market price is above a threshold, ensuring that net benefits are positive. And that very simply, because if the price is low, then that's will not significantly will not be. And if the price, the green area is much greater than the red area, so it means that the overall net benefit must be somewhere around here. Above that price, then they're not beneficial or suppliers markets and therefore. So that's how they do it in the US. And the flat price is published monthly, for instance, by PGM and others like ASO and so on. Of course, generators are not very happy with this system because it means that demand is competing with generation. So the General Association in the US, but FERC was finally backed by the Supreme Court. And you have similar things, similar discussions in several countries throughout the world since then. In Singapore, they had an even more aggressive approach to developing demand response participation in the market. First, it was only an ancillary services they call interruptible load. By the way, in the US, it also started services to the grid operator. But both countries, USA and Singapore, decided to own all markets because of this huge benefits it brings to all consumers. And the rule in Singapore was even greater, even nicer, because the rule is that demand risk be 1/3 of market benefit provides to the overall market. So the overall cost avoided. And as you saw that the benefit is many times the market price, that it's good to be paid 1/3 of the benefit rather than the market price. In the US, demand response is paid the market price. It is competing with generation, paid the same price. In EU, it also paid the same market price as per the new electricity market design directive, which was adopted basically a while ago, published 1 year and a week ago, I think. This directive states also that demand response should be accepted in all electricity markets, wholesale markets, free services. And again, there's this in the directive, this net benefit rule, which is, okay, we understand there's a cost for suppliers, for so-called suppliers in European language. So it means retailers, those who sell electricity to consumers. If consumers use less, okay, it's not nice for suppliers, but suppliers buy cheaper. So overall, they have a benefit. And if ever they have not, so if ever the benefit was not greater than the cost, then DR would be asked to compensate, to kind of reimburse part of the revenues that DR got from selling in the market. But that will be, of course, you understood, not very frequent. Frequently, DR will provide reduction of prices by selling in the markets are high. So when the reduction of prices, the benefit for all suppliers is greatest. And then there's no need to reimburse anything for DR according to the European. So those are several countries and regions of the world who have worked at a way to have demand response participate in the market. Some other countries are still working on that, or only started with the ancillary services, or only some consumers, not all consumers, like in Singapore at the time. But all countries are now, I think many countries now in the world are working on how to have flexibility participate in the market, because it's so beneficial for our consumers. So that's a kind of summary of the present. Having some consumers participate in the market, in their flexi, of course, bringing their flexibility, probably run aggregator to aggregate and operate it. This will be beneficial for all consumers. So not only those who participate, but all consumers, because they get overall a lower cost of using electricity. And why so? Because it avoids stupid investment in generation assets that would not be used frequently. It avoids investment in transport and distribution grids, because you can shave the peaks and you can balance renewables. And it avoids high prices for retailers so that they can the prices for consumers. So that's the point of having flexibility in the grid, and this has been discussed in the previous webinars, but maybe the innovative approach we are proposing is to say, do not wait for consumers to pay to bring their flexibility. Invite them to bring it for free and use it to benefit all consumers by deriving revenues from from the electricity market, and all the money it saves for suppliers and for grid operators. Thank you very much for your attention to this presentation. I guess the time now has come for the Q&A sessions, and I see there are some questions already, which I have not read, but maybe help me through those.